Alright, so in my last video I discussed 5 improvements that I've seen in Gotham Knights over the Arkham games. In other words, things that it looks like Gotham Knights is doing better. Today I want to talk about 5 ways that I think the Arkham games have still stayed on top to a degree, or 5 areas in which the Arkham games still seem to be ahead of Gotham Knights in terms of quality. Now again, this doesn't mean that Gotham Knights is going to be a better or worse game. I think Rocksteady and Warner Brothers Games Montreal have each put tons of really dedicated work into their respective games, and the gameplay styles are just a bit different, and there are trade-offs there. There are things that Gotham Knights will be better off in that regard for. There are things that the Arkham games will be better off for based upon the decisions that they made in those fundamental gameplay designs. So again, I'm not trying to bash either game. I'm just trying to highlight the differences that we are seeing in the different types of gameplay that we've seen from the Arkham games and from Gotham Knights. If you want to check out that last video where I discussed the 5 ways in which I think Gotham Knights has improved upon Arkham, that video will be in the description below. Today's video is 5 things that I still feel the Arkham games are doing better than Gotham Knights. So be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and would like to see more, and let's get right into this video. So starting in at number 5, I have combat. This is something that has been heavily criticized based upon the gameplay demos of Gotham Knights. However, those who have played through the previews have said it actually does feel a bit more like the Arkham free flow combat than we've been led to believe through those demos. So that is good news for people who really like the free flow combat system. However, it does sound as though some of the other concerns are pretty valid. It sounds like the combat encounters get really repetitive. It sounds like the arenas in which you get to fight the enemies feel very arcadey and they feel very video gamey, and that's something that just wasn't really the case in the Arkham games. They felt kind of real to a degree. Again, we knew we were playing a video game when we were playing the Arkham games, but there was something pretty nuanced and something that felt very legitimate about the placement of thugs and the number of thugs that you'd run into. Whereas in Gotham Knights, it sounds like, yep, you have a bunch of smaller thugs that you have to take down, and then there's a brute enemy, which is basically the same brute that you're going to run into every time, same voice actors, same look, and so it feels just very repetitive. It feels like you're running into the same person every single time, and that starts to take you out of the experience a bit. Again, from what I've heard, I haven't played this game. I don't know how big that problem actually is. But those are the concerns that people have had watching the gameplay demos, and they are concerns that do seem somewhat validated by those who have actually tried out the game as well. Now, I do want to point out that this is a very different style of game than Arkham in the sense that you get to take down enemies in a variety of different ways. If you want to do it from ranged attacks, if you want to do it from close combat, if you want to do it through hacking, those are all valid ways to take down enemies in this game. In the Arkham games, you also did have some varied ways that you could take enemies down, but it was all built around a very specific character and a very specific gameplay design with more of that customization and more of that freedom. In Gotham Knights, I do think that you have to dumb down the combat to a degree. You have to make it a bit more simplistic, but I do understand that it is hard to go from a very refined Batman Arkham combat and bring it to a little bit more of a simplistic Gotham Knights level, but I do think that the freedom with which you get to attack your enemies and change that up will at least keep it fresh and interesting, just in a different way than the Arkham games did. So at number 4, I'm going to put what I call Rooftop traversal. In the last video, I talked about how vehicular traversal seems better in Gotham Knights, but on the other hand, I think the grappling, gliding, and other mechanics of getting around the city for each character was something that was just handled better in Batman Arkham. I think that the grappling, gliding system, and parkour mechanics of the Arkham games worked very well, and they built the city around those systems, so it all felt very cohesive and very refined. Gotham Knights is doing something a bit different, where each character has their own way of getting around the city. Of course, each one has a grappling hook. Batgirl glides like the Arkham games, but all around it's pretty hit or miss. Robin has a teleportation tactic, which doesn't look all that interesting to me. It looks kind of weird. Red Hood has this soul jump ability, which has been heavily criticized. It doesn't really bother me, but it does look kind of strange and doesn't look as fun as the grappling gliding system of the Arkham games. Batgirl, her mechanics look like they are not quite as refined as Batman's were in the Batman Arkham games, again, because she has to be kind of at the same power level as the other knights who don't glide around the city. And so ultimately, I think it's just pretty hit or miss, whereas in the Arkham games, it was always consistently very great, and so it's not something that I think will be as great all across the board. But again, I do like the variety, and again, it's just that difference in a game that is built around a single character who has a very specific set of abilities versus building a game around 4 various characters that you can play as who each move around in a very different way. Again, I think that that will add to the longevity of trying out the different mechanics, trying to get good at each of them, but I do think that then all around that level of refinement that was in the Arkham games can't necessarily exist to the same degree. All right, at number 3, I have the dialogue. The dialogue of Gotham Knights sometimes sounds great, and there are things about Gotham Knights that I think have been improved from the Arkham games, even on top of the 5 that I listed in my video. Like, I do think that the dynamics between the characters look much better here. It looks like there's a lot more character development and a lot more between each of these characters, a lot more chemistry between each of them than we really saw in the Arkham games. With that being said, the dialogue can be really cheesy here, both between the Gotham Knights themselves and between the thugs you encounter. The thug dialogue in the Batgirl 15 minutes of gameplay that we saw from IGN looks really quite cheesy and cringy. It's not a deal breaker for me. I don't think it's a huge problem, but the Arkham games hit that perfect balance of being funny and serious and moving, and it just hit all the right beats. Again, Gotham Knights has moments that sound incredible, but there's also a lot of dialogue that has left me scratching my head as to why it got written, why it got approved, why it got recorded, and why it got put into the game without someone being like, you know, this kind of clashes with the rest of the tone. But again, I can live with it. It's not that big of a problem. If that is like one of my biggest gripes with Gotham Knights, I think we're in pretty good shape overall. I do think that they're doing a great job with each of the characters' characterization, and I'm really excited to see their dynamics throughout this game. Again, there's going to be those few lines that I roll my eyes at. So at number 2, I have stealth. This was something that was a huge highlight of the Batman Arkham games and doesn't really seem to be in Gotham Knights. Now, we know that there is stealth functionality in Gotham Knights, and that's great, but it doesn't seem like they necessarily have dedicated stealth encounters. In the Batman Arkham games, there were Predator rooms where you'd go into a room full of enemies with guns, and there was just no way for you as Batman to take them down through melee combat. It would have been completely impossible. Due to those gameplay mechanics, you would have been shot down pretty much instantly. You have enemies with shotguns and machine guns, and, you know, you just, as Batman, are awesome, and, you know, you can evade and maybe drop a smoke pellet, but you are pretty outmatched when you are outgunned in those games. It does a lot to make Batman feel human, and those Predator encounters just really made you change up your style of combat. You had to strike from the shadows, you had to try and scare your enemies, and it was really a fun system. Gotham Knights stealth feels more like a flavor than a core ingredient. It feels like something you can choose to participate in if that is more your gameplay style. However, it does seem like pretty much any enemy can be taken down with hand-to-hand combat, and I just find that disappointing. I think that it's really tricky because the creative director, Patrick Redding, was actually a creative director on some of the Splinter Cell projects. And the Splinter Cell games are really good with their stealth, so I think it's disappointing that the stealth hasn't been carried over, even though I do know that it's a different style of gameplay. It's trying to go in a more RPG direction than Splinter Cell or Arkham ever did. But again, it just would have been really nice to find a way to incorporate stealth in a broader sense than it seems it's being incorporated in Gotham Knights. I really enjoyed the Predator rooms of Arkham, and it just doesn't necessarily seem like Gotham Knights has anything to quite match that. And finally, at number 1, I have boss battles. Now, this is something that I think has some caveats to it. For example, Arkham Knight didn't really have boss battles. It had like a handful, and none of them were necessarily that good. But Arkham does have very iconic boss battles, everything from Deathstroke in Arkham Origins to Mr. Freeze in Arkham City. But I think that what made them great was just the variety there. And Gotham Knights does seem to have more boss battles, generally speaking, than the Arkham games did. But with that being said, they don't necessarily look very distinct from each other. It looks like you kind of just jump in and start button mashing, kind of like you do with most encounters with random thugs on the street in this game. Whereas you look at something like Arkham City or Arkham Origins, where each boss encounter really forced you to switch up your tactics. And I think Gotham Knights might have this to a degree, but there was just something about using that environment against Mr. Freeze in Arkham City and having that be the only way to take him out. And I don't know that Gotham Knights has a gameplay design that will accommodate that, because again, I think each villain will need to have a number of ways that you can take them out, so that however you have built out your character in Gotham Knights, you will stand a chance against them. I do think it would be way more exciting if each boss battle, if each villain encounter forced you to kind of figure out what their strengths and weaknesses were and then build your character to accommodate that and then go fight them in a boss encounter. I just feel that it is perhaps going to feel a bit repetitive as the rest of the combat. When you take on bosses, it doesn't look like each boss in this game has the level of fidelity that some of those Arkham bosses had, which, you know, to be fair, the Arkham boss battles were pretty hit or miss. The Bane one in Arkham Asylum was pretty monotonous and egregious. But then again, Mr. Freeze, Deathstroke, Copperhead, there were some really great ones there. And again, I just don't see Gotham Knights having that same level of quality when you go one-to-one against some of these villains in their boss battles. But I hope to be proven wrong on that one. And hey, maybe I'll be proven wrong on a lot of things on this list. Maybe the traversal and combat will feel much more exciting than I'm giving it credit for. I haven't played the game yet. I'm just going off what I've heard from people who've played it in the previews, and I'm going off of what I've seen in the gameplay demos. But let me know in the comments below what you are looking forward to in Gotham Knights. Are you excited for the game yet? Again, please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, and we will see you guys in the next video.